This is Matt Cuso, and you're listening to the Flagship. Today we are joined by Representative David Murphy, who represents Wisconsin's 56th Assembly District in the Fox Valley. In the state legislature, Representative Murphy serves as the chairman of the Assembly Committee on Colleges and Universities. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Matt. It's really a pleasure to be here and look forward to talking with you today.
We're in different times. I avoided the word difficult. I'll just use the word different. We're in different times. Tell us about the impact that COVID-19 is having on state finances, as much as you know at this point.
Well, Matt, coming into this budget, we had a large surplus. We had a large rainy day fund. And
it's raining.
Yes, it is raining. And it was looking very rosy. Now, the surplus is gone. The rainy day fund is pretty much gone. But I think the citizens of Wisconsin are not seeing any issues at this point as far as anything being cut or slashed, and it's because of that surplus and rainy day fund. So it's a lot better to go into this with those monies built up than if we didn't. We would already be in a tremendous hole if it weren't for that. So in April, revenues for the state in comparison to the year before were down around $870 million. May, as we started to open up, was much better, and we were only down $66 million. June, a little bit worse again, but so far we're down about $1.3 billion, which the rainy day fund and the surplus, that's pretty much
it's all gone.
It. Yeah. Now, July might be a pretty good month for the budget because our new tax day, was moved to July 15th.
July 15th.
Well, with that, most of the people who would get a refund file early. The people that have to pay in file late. So they don't have to file till July 18th. So there might be a fair amount of money coming in July. I think it'll be interesting to see where we're at when they report numbers at the end of the month.
Well, that's a very optimistic description, all things considered. It's good to hear this in this environment. But any way you look at it, the state's going to be experiencing a deficit going into the next 2-year budget cycle.
Definitely.
What do you think that means for state services in general, especially those that rely on those general purpose tax revenues?
Well, definitely the Republican caucus was interested in attacking this earlier rather than later. We had proposed to the governor that the second year of the budget be frozen right away.
So that would be starting basically July 1st.
Starting July 1st.
So that would mean just sort of a freeze in services back to like a base level.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So it would only be taking away the increases in the second year of the budget. Now, that would help quite a bit. And, just based on if the economy is recovering more quickly than we thought, having the surpluses that we had, we might not have to do a budget repair bill. But if we come back in January and we have to then take this up, we only have 1/4 of the budget left to work with. And so then it could become very drastic in the approach that we would have to take to get that budget fixed.
So you'd prefer to act now when you have more time left in the calendar to curb expenditures as opposed to getting that bill 6 months from now?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
For instance, K-12 schools will be getting a $200 per student increase in August.
As of August.
And while I think a lot of people would say, oh my God, we don't want to decrease funding to our K-12 schools, $200 per student wouldn't be the end of the world, I don't think. And if it becomes a budget repair bill later on and all of a sudden we are furloughing employees, that gets to be pretty drastic, and I would like to see us be able to get away from that if we can.
So where is that discussion at the Capitol? Did the governor, is he open to those negotiations?
He hasn't been open to doing anything at this point. And I don't know if he thinks that somehow we're going to be super lucky in, the economy is going to recover enough by January that we're not going to have to do it. I just think that that's not very likely at all. And I think you're just taking a very bad bet when you take that one.
Is there anything that requires the governor or the legislature to act If the budget's off by a certain amount, are you required to make an adjustment?
Yes, we would be required to do a budget repair bill. If the Fiscal Bureau says the budget is going to be off by X amount, we would have to be in.
Pulls you back in. You have to make a decision at that point.
And we consider that likely that would be the case.
Okay. And you think it'd be more December, January?
Yep.
Then as opposed, but if you act sooner, it gives you a little bit more flexibility to play with more accounts. Is the governor sending signals that K-12 is off the table as far as cutting funds to meet the deficit?
Well, it'll be difficult because K-12 will have already gotten their increase for the year. There isn't any mechanism to go and take it back once it's out there. And what that does then is, for instance, the university could be...
You're reading my mind.
Could be hit harder because...
We're one of the only ones left.
Exactly.
Yes. I think that's one of the problems with the way the budget is currently structured is that we're one of the larger draws off of GPR. So if K-12 is not part of the conversation and if medical assistance is not part of the conversation and you have shared revenue in there, right, which is aid going to municipalities for police, fire, those services, very hard to cut there.
Where do you cut on local safety type services?
Right,
corrections,
very
difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you have the university coming along. And so what we've seen historically, even going back to Governor Doyle before you were elected, was that the university is often used to balance the budget.
Exactly.
And so there was a year that Governor Doyle had to cut $250 million. He let them backfill in a big portion of it with increases in tuition. Mm-hmm. And of course, that led to Governor Walker's infamous tuition freeze.
Yeah, and the university has taken cuts under both Democratic and Republican administrations just for the reason that you're talking about, because that becomes the GPR, that flexible money, so to speak, that you have to work with. And if you let too many of the other areas become untouchable, you don't have anything left. And Doyle had cut the university by $250 million. Walker, in one budget, cut it by $250 million. And it becomes very tough and things become very tight.
Even more recently, we saw the governor move to save $70 million GPR at the end of the fiscal year. And the university took 65% of that cut. It was about $49 million, I think.
Over $40 million of a $70 million cut.
More than our fair share.
And of course, the average citizen out there doesn't understand what happened there. So the governor comes out and says, well, we cut back 5%. Well, people think it's 5% of the budget. No, that would be billions of dollars. Right. It's 5% of his administration budget. And so it's $70 million. And it's a drop in the bucket when you talk about April revenues being down $870 million. $70 million doesn't go too far
doesn't get you too far.
That. Yeah.
Does it buy us any goodwill in the next budget? I mean, obviously the state's going to be looking at less tax revenues. We're always vulnerable.
I don't know at this point whether it's bought you any goodwill. I can tell you that personally, I will bring it up because I think it's important for people to understand how much the university has taken it on the chin in this whole thing. I find it interesting that when there's CARES money out there, for instance, K-12 seems to be the first one that's looked at and given money. And to my way of thinking, the universities have suffered much more because of this COVID pandemic than what the K-12 schools have done. The K-12 schools, all their funding sources have remained in place, and they've gotten every dollar that they would normally get. And in some cases, their expenses were actually reduced. They sent their students home. They did some clawbacks on their busing contracts, on their cleaning contracts. Yeah, they actually probably saved some money in some instances, where the university was refunding money for housing and meals and all those sorts of things. And so the universities were losing pretty big amounts of revenue in comparison to the K-12s. But the K-12s ended up getting more of the CARES money than the universities did. And I didn't understand the thinking behind that.
Yeah, it was disappointing. That $100 million in CARES money came to Wisconsin for all education, and it it did specifically go to K-12.
Yeah, I don't think that was divided up right at all, Matt.
Yeah, so the universities were definitely hurting at that period of time. It's only going to get worse as things, start to progress towards the fall. Whether they can open up or not, I think is still yet to be seen. But I think the double whammy for universities in the last 10 years, not only has it been lagging state support, but it's been that resident tuition freeze.
Yep.
We're going on 8 years.
Yep.
When it started 8 years ago, it was a reaction to a couple years of double-digit increases in resident tuition.
Yep.
That the Board of Regents approved. And so there was a very strong political base of support for freezing tuition. Mm-hmm. Where are you at now? We're 8 years into it.
Well, as a legislator trying to be reelected, if I go out and do doors, the tuition freeze is very popular. But I also look at this whole thing that a student going to college, there is a user fee element to this. And I don't agree with Elizabeth Warren that, somehow the government should be paying for everybody's college. I believe that students should have skin in the game and that there needs to be a tuition fee. It needs to be reasonable. It needs to, not go up 19% a year. I mean,
that was tough.
Some of those increases were ridiculously high. That I've had legislation out there.
Yes.
To try to change that. Now, some people don't like my legislation. The cohort tuition has been something that they, recoil at a little bit.
But you're opening the door.
Yeah, I'm trying to open the door. I want people to think about it. And I want the idea that tuition is a user fee to, to sort of get into the conversation so that people are thinking about that. But the reason I wanted to present cohort tuition was the idea that at least when a student started, them and their family would know that their tuition at least would not increase while they were in college. And that has an attractive nature.
The predictability.
The predictability of it.
Yeah.
So we might look at some other things. I think I would like to certainly be assured that going forward, when the university would take back control of tuition, that we would know that it would be something that would be reasonable.
I think that's a fair request. Mm-hmm. I think the third pressure that a lot of universities are seeing right now is declining demographics.
Yep.
They're seeing fewer seniors graduating from high school, fewer numbers that are pursuing a college degree. Here in Wisconsin, over the course of the last 10 years, we're 11,000 students fewer than we were in 2010.
Yeah.
That's the equivalent of three enrollments. Yeah. It's the equivalent of 3 enrollments at our system.
Yeah.
Is it time for the legislature to start to consider the overall size of the university system? Or are we positioned well?
Well, Matt, this is a question that's come up to me pretty often. What I've said in the past is we always need to be looking at, are we right-sized? Businesses are doing this all the time. They're talking about right-sizing their business or whatever. And so that discussion needs to happen. Now, in 2010, enrollment was quite high. And again, coming out of a recession, more kids going to school, a lot of the two-year campuses were probably as big as they had ever been.
I think it was their best year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I had said to somebody, to a reporter, actually just about a year ago. And I said, I know enrollment has gone down because the economy's good and there's lots of jobs. On the other hand, who knows when the economy might go into a recession again, and maybe some of those schools would come back. So I said, I don't want to jump the gun and do something too quickly. Now, we will see in the next year or two how much COVID has affected the economy, how much more training that some people feel they need to get into the job market, and maybe some of those two-year campuses again will start picking up, and who knows. But then I think, going forward from that, then we need to take a very close look at it and see, what is the appropriate action to be taken going forward.
So you mentioned the impact of COVID-19. Mm-hmm. Lawmakers had been pushing universities to consider more efficient methods for quite a while, to move certain classes, certain disciplines online. And really, universities were pushing back. And then it happened very quickly. What is your reaction to what online and distance learning education is going to look like moving forward?
Well, one of the things that I always loved about Ray Cross was bringing the Flex Option program to the University of Wisconsin and really pushing that. And I wrote a letter to him recently, and I mentioned that in particular that I thanked him for.
Talk a little bit about Flex Option.
Well, Flex Option is the ability to finish degrees online. And a lot of those students were coming in with some college and being able to finish online. And that, I think, is a tremendous option. And I think Ray was sort of a visionary in understanding that that was something that needed to be available out there to our students. And it was small but growing. Now we get forced into it, so there's a lot more usage of it. And of course, now a lot of the people that were pushing for more online are some of the same ones that are pushing to get them back
slow down,
in the classroom,
Yeah.
Including myself. But I think we know that going forward, that education will probably always now be some kind of a hybrid between in-person and online. And our interim president of the system and former governor Tommy Thompson has asked for $110 million, from the CARES package to use for student testing, employee testing, and PPEs. And I asked some of my colleagues, how they felt about that. Some of the hardliners kind of recoiled a bit. It's like, oh, I don't know about that. And I said, well, what if that makes a difference between students being in the classroom and students not being in the classroom? And I got to tell you, they changed their tune quite quickly on that. They,
right.
If that's what it takes to get them in the classroom, then all of a sudden they're for it. Yeah.
It's unfortunately that money isn't going into the classroom, but that's where we're at.
Right, but it gets students in the classroom.
What impact do you think COVID-19 will have on enrollment this fall? Do you think we're going to see a lot of freshmen in particular maybe take a gap year because that experience isn't going to be what they were expecting?
Well, interestingly, I had a meeting in person with Governor Thompson, the president of the system now, and we talked very much about the importance of in-person classes. The big thing about the in-person classes is that's what students want. I hear this over and over again that the students, and even heard from students that said, well, I've been accepted at Madison, but if classes are going to be online, I don't know if I'm going to go or not. I might just go somewhere else or go closer to home and not go to Madison.
That could be good for the 2 years.
Yeah, it could be. But, I think that it does tell you a lot about the mindset of the students and that they want to be in the classroom as much as possible. And there are systems like California that are not having any in-person classes, as I understand it. And I think this is going to hurt those systems quite a bit. And I could see systems like Wisconsin recruiting
picking up some candidates
from other systems that are not open. And I think it's a tremendous competitive advantage if you have your classes open.
Could be an interesting side effect. Yeah. Do you think that classes will be open this fall?
Boy, I've gone back and forth on this quite a bit, Matt. It seems like the system has been saying all along and pushing, we're going to have classes open, we're going to have classes open. At the end of the day, though, I'm not sure. I think the attitude of the faculty is going to be huge. I mean, if professors say, we're not going to teach in person, then it may be difficult. You could have a revolt by faculty, I suppose.
Yeah, I think we're seeing
that. I
hope
that's not the case. And I've talked to a lot of professors, and they seem, for the most part, to want to be in, but I just don't know what the mass of the faculty might do.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that in small degrees already, where some professors are not comfortable coming back and teaching in a large setting.
And I think it would be important to facilitate professors that are uncomfortable about being in and try to figure out a way to accommodate them through this process somehow.
So you're the chancellor of a large school at the University of Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. You are in the middle of COVID-19. You're not certain if classes are going to resume in the fall. Your resident tuitions froze, and the state of Wisconsin is experiencing a severe decline in budgetary funds next budget. What's the silver lining? What do they tell parents and students to get them to come back to their schools?
Well, I think the competitive advantage that I talked about is important. If you're open, I think you're more likely to do well than if you're closed. The CARES money is important because it covers some of that cost, or hopefully most of the cost of trying to operate your classes more safely. While there's a lot of spread of COVID right now among younger people, the death rate has been very, very low. And it's amazing to me as I see cases going up and the number of deaths going down. So I think we can have classes safely. And I feel the same way for K-12. I think our K-12s should do everything in their power to try to be open as normally as possible.
So I want to jump to the Board of Regents. They just went through a very difficult search for a new president to replace Ray Cross.
Yes.
Any comment on the process that they used to find the replacement, and then how it eventually worked out with former Governor Thompson accepting the position?
There were some complaints about the process and about having enough diversity on that committee of, having more faculty, having some students. I'm not against that. And
the
that
diversity?
would be fine. I don't necessarily know that it caused a bad process or that the candidates that we had weren't vetted properly.
Did the process that the Board of Regents used, did it eventually lead to the revolt, I think, that we saw when the first candidate was announced?
I don't know. I don't know enough about all the inner workings of that to know that made the difference. Because I think at the end of the day, no matter who would have been selected, somebody would have a complaint about it. And I think if you overreact to every complaint that you get, you'd never have anyone.
Right. No one would apply.
Exactly. And while Mr. Johnson maybe could have had some better answers to some of the questions in the forum, and I watched that entire Zoom meeting, I didn't come away with it that he had necessarily done anything to eliminate himself. But I think that, in a lot of ways, maybe in the long run, this has worked out pretty well for the university because I think Tommy Thompson is an awesome choice. He will end up, being here probably a little longer than people expect. I expect him to probably be in that position for close to 2 years.
What advantage or what strength does Tommy Thompson have, President Thompson have, because it's an interim position?
There's a certain amount of freedom that probably gives you. There's a bit less pressure, I think, from that. Although Tommy is the kind of guy that I don't think the pressure would necessarily get to him anyway. He is so knowledgeable, so well connected. He knows all the levers of government. I met with him today. He's got a great staff. So he's just up and running so quickly. And this is a godsend, I think, for the university to have somebody be able to take that over and move that quickly. He won his last governor's race by about 60%, with 60% of the vote. I doubt whether we'll ever see anybody do that again. But it tells you a little bit about his ability to reach out to people and get along and be bipartisan. And, for that reason, I think he'll do very, very well. The other thing that's going to help him a lot is, I think Republicans are going to be a little bit leery of taking a hatchet to Tommy Thompson. And for that reason, I think he's a really good choice for the university. I mean, there isn't any Republican legislator that isn't going to let Tommy Thompson come in and talk to him and give him a fair airing of why he needs certain things for the university. I think that's great for the university. This was just a tremendously smart move.
It worked
to bring
out.
Him in.
It worked out very well for everybody involved. You're confident he's going to be able to navigate the legislature and communicate in ways that that the university hasn't seen?
Better than anyone that I can think of could do.
Well, he's walking into some very trying times, so now's the right time for the university. We saw this week that Governor Evers launched his task force to study the issue of student debt here in the state of Wisconsin. This is an issue that's been talked about a lot. What's your involvement in the issue and your thoughts on any reforms that the state of Wisconsin should consider?
Well, Matt, this is an issue I've worked an awful lot on, and student debt is very important. I mean, part of the tuition freeze is about getting at student debt, and I think, we've made some strides here, and I think student debt in Wisconsin, as far as the increase in it, has been slowed pretty dramatically. I think other states are moving past us sort of on the list, at least in the last few years now because of that. But I have talked about the fact that I do believe students should have skin in the game, and that, that they should be paying some type of user fee for going to college and gaining that advantage. I look at it as in comparison to students that don't go to college, and those people are paying taxes to subsidize the students that are going to college, so that they can make a higher income. And so there's a balance there that needs close attention.
Should they be allowed to refinance student debt like you would refinance a mortgage on a house or credit card debt?
Well, the interesting thing is, really that's a federal thing. They can't refinance their own student loan with the federal government. If you have a private loan, you can refinance if.
Right. Take out a loan, pay off the federal student loan. Sure.
Yeah. But I mean, those
you can't
aren't always
refinance
good
at interest
options.
rate.
Yeah, and it's not like refinancing your house. You find a little lower rate after a few years, you refinance it, and you're able to take your rate down. But yeah, I have nothing against it. But again, that's a federal issue. Some have talked about, well, the state of Wisconsin should get involved in that, and that's a very bad idea. And I would strongly advise people that that's a bad idea and not to support it, because what you would end up doing is you're taking all this debt that now sits with the federal government and you'd be putting it on the backs of our state taxpayers. And you really don't want to do that. And secondly, we aren't able to really cut the rates very much, because by the time the state bonds for the money, puts in a cost for collections and the like, and puts in an amount for bad debt, the ability to be under about 7 or 8%, just isn't there. And so, the federal loan is still probably going to be at a better rate than what we would be able to do, unless it was heavily subsidized. So
it's a tricky conversation.
It is. The important thing with student debt, though, we have so many students that take out loans and never finish school. And those are the ones that are defaulting, and those are the ones that are the biggest problem. And then you have a handful on the other end that get fairly large. There was a girl I was talking to that had $70,000 in student debt, and she got a psychology degree after 4 years. And it's like, that's too much money to put into that degree, because your earning power just isn't going to be at a high enough level to repay that kind of a loan.
Do you see any separation between, students that went to a UW school, a public school, as opposed to the student debt that some of the students that are going to private institutions are incurring?
Well, actually not that much, because the private institutions seem to be able to come up with so much grant money that, they actually sometimes are in a better position than the university.
To control the debt.
The UW students are, yeah.
Yeah. Recently, President Cross had requested sort of an emergency line of credit. I think he's seeing some of the other Big Ten schools around the country obtain this line of credit to fill in the gaps and to cover costs with COVID-19 as they jump up. Do you think a line of credit, I think President Cross had suggested a $1 billion line of credit for UW system. Is that a good idea?
A $1 billion line of credit is not a good idea, but we have actually drafted legislation for a smaller line of credit, roughly about half of that.
Something to help in an emergency.
Something to help. And the reason that I did that, as I've stated to some people, it's a piece of legislation I have in my back pocket. And as the chairman of the Colleges and Universities Committee, I wanted to make sure that if this was needed, that we could act on it quickly. I'm still trying to decide whether I think that's the right idea or not. But being prepared, I've seen through this whole COVID thing, when government is not prepared, bad things happen. DWD wasn't prepared to take care of unemployment at the rate it's at, and we've had lots of problems. I don't want to get stuck in that same spot and say that we weren't ready. So we are ready if that's needed.
So for that to be most helpful, though, the legislature would have to come back and pass something like that.
It would.
Now, right?
Yeah, or in the pretty near future. It would have to be within the next couple of months.
So if they come back for larger purposes, this would be something that you would like them to consider.
Now, in talks with the Fiscal Bureau, they're saying that they feel like the cash flow for the university system would be okay. But again, if it's not.
In regards to the revolving line of credit, okay.
Yeah. One thing, Matt, what I've said about the line of credit for the university is, and I've said this many times, is that we talk about the balances, the account balances at the university. And, 6 or 8 years ago, the CPA caucus fund balances that, that some people considered, too high.
Yes.
And since that time, they've come down some. And what I've said to the university is, guys, I know these balances might be coming down somewhat, but you don't need balances like a private university would have, because at the end of the day, the state would have your back.
Right.
I wasn't lying when I said those words. I mean, I felt like there was a certain level of responsibility that I had to the UW is, if this really comes into play, what I said in the past wasn't just a bunch of words. I mean, I believe that, and I believe we need to have the universities back if that would become critical.
It's good that you have that promise on the line, because I think a lot of chancellors who over the course of the last few years have taken some fair ribbing from legislators about those reserve funds.
Yes.
In light of COVID-19, obviously that money, much like the state's rainy day account, they're glad they had it.
Yeah.
And it is probably, not nearly enough to get them through what they need to.
This is a cash flow issue. Every business knows they have to have enough money in their checking account to pay the bills from month to month. And the university is a big organization. They need a little more money in their checkbook than the average.
Yes. Well, if the students don't come back in full force in the fall, all those accounts, they're going to be lower. Yeah. And as you said, there's going to be cost to the health screenings and to disinfecting.
Yep.
That's going to have to come from somewhere. So interesting times.
And hopefully the CARES Act, will cover that. That would be something that we don't need legislation for. That money's there. The governor has purview over that. Governor Thompson asked me today whether there was enough CARES money left to cover those things. And according to my calculations, there's something just short of about $300 million of that CARES money that hasn't been, designated to a particular.
So that's out of about $2 billion, right? Not quite.
Out of about $2 billion. Yeah. So, a good share of it's gone.
Yes. And the governor has the authority to appropriate that money without legislative oversight?
He does.
And you guys are okay with that?
Well, we don't have much choice. This is federal legislation, and that's the way it came down. And we're kind of stuck.
Okay.
We don't get any input on that.
So there's no ability to weigh in.
We've tried to, I think there's a fair amount of legislators that have talked to the governor, or we've given some direction on what we think should happen. For instance, the governor spent, I think, $40 million on ventilators to buy 1,500 ventilators that I don't think we need any of them. And we can get out of the contract for $20 million now, but $20 million is going to be lost. I would love to give that to the UW.
Yeah, I think they would love to have it at this point too. That's a down payment on President Thompson's request.
Yeah.
Year after year, the UW system has been asking for bonding authority.
Yep.
They quickly point to a lot of other systems across the country that have the ability to issue bonds to construct projects that are exclusively paid for with program revenues. So for instance, the ability to build a dorm and then charge students to live in the dorm and use that money to pay back the bonds. UW system is one of the only ones in the country that doesn't have that bonding authority.
Yep.
Is it time to have a discussion about granting them that flexibility?
It's certainly a time to have that discussion. I thought you were going to ask me whether it was time to do it or not.
I wasn't going to go that far.
You're not going to nail me down quite that much.
No.
Huh? Well, so our office is in the process right now of investigating this. And so the questions that we're trying to get answered, and we're talking with the Fiscal Bureau about this, is can they estimate for us what kind of bonding cost that the university would have? And then is this going to affect state bonding in any way?
Sure.
It kind of reminds me a little bit like we were having a discussion a couple of years ago about the state self-funding health insurance. And the question was, well, the state could save so much money, but how would this affect the private market? And, maybe we could save the state some money, but then end up with the unintended consequence of driving up the cost for the public for health insurance a lot. So trying to figure out what those unintended consequences of this might be. But I think if we can come to a place where it looks like, like it's a win-win, or at least not a win-lose, but a win-even.
Right. It's a complicated concept, I think, for people to understand because, the university system is such a large percentage of the state's overall assets. And to take that percentage off the books suddenly, I think it does. It warrants questions. Does it drive down the state's bond rating? And, what level can UW system financially operate with their own rating? And those are big questions to answer, right? Yeah. You don't want to simplify it and end up paying more money in two different spots.
And in a way, Matt, if you think about it, we end up for quite some time with sort of a hybrid in which the bonding that's already there would still be state bonding the way it is. The new bonding would be different. And you have a mix of those two things. And how does the mix play into how everything comes out in the end?
At the end of the day, this is about constructing projects faster and more efficiently. That's what the university is trying to drive to. And I think if those questions can be answered, then as a public policy, it's a slam dunk. But it has to be more efficient on both sides of the coin.
I agree with that completely. And I think one of the things that would help an awful lot is if the state would open up more projects to design build. And I strongly support design build because I see how much it can reduce cost. And I've been a strong pusher for design build to be approved.
Yeah. That concept of one company, taking a project from start to finish. Yep. Yeah. As opposed to breaking it up.
Projects are taking too long and there's too much cost. And I believe that actually we would get better projects because, for instance, with the UW, you would have these multiple designs to pick from, and being able to pick more functional, better projects, I think would be well worth it. I can't imagine going in and buying a car and sort of being stuck with one car rather than getting to pick, more of the options
right
that make that car up and make it really useful for who is ever using it.
So as governor, Tommy Thompson was a notorious builder, right? He loved building roads. He loved, building buildings on campus. He viewed it as economic development. What impact do you think that he will have on this discussion with some members of the legislature, some more conservative members of the legislature that just in the past haven't been ready to give up that authority?
Sure. And I'll tell you right out, I don't love building buildings. I'm just the opposite.
You're the opposite.
I would prefer not to because I think too much brick and mortar going forward is something that is going to come back to haunt us in the university. Now, that doesn't mean that there are facilities that get outdated and need to be replaced. But I think so much about the footprint of the university and not expanding the footprint too much.
So as distance learning, as that conversation comes into play.
And again, you're Badgers United, and that's Madison. I'm thinking a little bit more globally about campuses all over the state, but enrollments aren't increasing; they're going down, and we need to keep that footprint reasonable under that scenario.
As chairman of the Assembly Committee on Colleges and Universities, how do you express the value of higher education to someone in northern Wisconsin who may not have attended a UW system institution, may not have a child or grandchild in an institution? Why is it important that they still support a strong UW system?
Well, we're talking about the Wisconsin idea here, and it's the idea that we're getting the ideas, the technology out to all parts of the state. And we do that sometimes. Sometimes we do the Wisconsin idea pretty well. Sometimes we don't. I think there are situations in which we have a lot of knowledge and we sit on it a little bit. I had an example of a mom who had a child with dyslexia, and she finally took her child out of school because he wasn't doing well and homeschooled him. She happened to be a former teacher, so that didn't work too badly for her.
Right.
But she actually went to the UW and found a researcher there that worked on dyslexia, and he helped her and put together the program for her to teach her child. And he ended up doing quite well. She went back to the researcher and said, "What schools are using this in Wisconsin?" And he said, to my knowledge, none. And, she's flabbergasted. It's like, we have this knowledge. Why aren't we getting it out there?
Connecting
and
dots.
So sometimes the Wisconsin idea, the Wisconsin idea is a good idea. Sometimes the application of it isn't as good as it could be.
More of a challenge.
And so,
right. Yeah. Is the demand for knowledge from UW Madison for research, is it strong throughout the state?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think whenever problems come up, COVID is a good example. I think people are looking to the university to tell us more about how does the disease spread, what makes me vulnerable, what activities,
what do we do and what do we not?
What's getting me in trouble and what's not. And then also, I think, the University of Wisconsin, Madison is such an important research university that people are, I'm sure there's people in Wisconsin that are thinking, well, the vaccine is going to come from somewhere. It's probably as good a chance it'll come from UW Madison as anywhere else.
That's right. It's a point of pride in the state.
Oh, gosh, absolutely.
That UW Madison has tackled some of those, life-changing moments in our history, and they're right in this fight too. It could very well come from just down the street.
Yeah.
Well, Representative Murphy, thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate your time.
Matt, it's always a pleasure to be with you. And just thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to some of these issues that are important. And it's important to get them out there to the public.
You have some big topics on your plate. Good luck.
You bet. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today. This is Matt Cuso, and you've been listening to The Flagship.